Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm joined by Kyle McClelland of the Adventure Chasing YouTube channel to kick off our Whitetail Adventure series as we discuss floating rivers for whitetails. All right, welcome back to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and their Camo for Conservation initiative. Every purchase you make of First Light's gear in the Spectre camo pattern, which is their whitetail pattern, a portion of those proceeds go back to the National Deer Association to help them with their mission to protect the future of deer and deer hunting here in America. Good stuff. And today's episode, in my humble opinion, is some good stuff too. We are kicking off a new series. This is our Whitetail Adventure series, in which we are going to explore the many different ways that we can add diversity, excitement, and adventure into our whitetail hunts. I think that we have experienced something over the last 10 to 20 years here in the whitetail world, and I think it has maybe been by virtue of the influence of media and social media, but I think that the experience of whitetail hunting in many ways has tightened and narrowed more and more and more into a very kind of specific way of doing things. There's, a lot of folks that want to hunt their manicured private land farms, that your managed whitetail mecca with box blinds and food plots and all that stuff. And that's great. And then you've also got some folks that are hunting public land and they're going in on their day trips, running gun with their sticks in their saddle. And that's great too. But a lot of folks, I think, are falling into a rut. They're falling into like, this is the way I do it. This is the only way I do it. And maybe it's because they see someone on YouTube or they listen to a podcast or they've read the articles and this is the way. But as we talked about a week or two ago with, Steve Magnus, when we discussed how there are some risks to getting stuck in your ways, to narrowing, to specializing too much, there are also huge benefits to broadening your horizon, to adding new experiences, to exploring new ways of doing things, to spicing it up. And I think that's something that at least I personally have felt like I need. I've definitely fallen into a little bit of a rut with how I hunt and have been, of course, really focused on, achieving my personal goals, killing a mature buck or this specific deer, whatever it is. And that's all good and well sometimes, but I have definitely had the feeling lately, and I know other people have expressed this to me too, that a good old adventure would be a hell of a palate cleanser. And so this month on the show, we're going to speak to a number of different people about ways we can do that. Different adventures that you can have while also chasing your favorite big game animal. Because a whitetail deer hunt doesn't just have to be sitting on a farm shooting a deer in a cornfield. It doesn't just have to be slipping in with sticks and stand, into the 200-acre public land spot for an evening hunt and then going back home. You can have a big, wild experience chasing whitetails. That's not just reserved for people out west going on elk hunts or sheep hunts or going up to Alaska or Canada for caribou or moose. You can have a wild adventure with whitetails. That's what I'm hoping I can convince all of us of over the course of this series. And hopefully we can get inspired with, new ideas, new techniques, and ways to really broaden our whitetail experience and bring home some really exciting stories as a result of it all. So with all that said, that's the plan for the month. And our first guest in this series is a guy named Kyle McClelland. He is a fishing guide. He is a lifelong outdoor adventurer, hunter, angler, and a creator over on YouTube now at the Adventure Chasing YouTube channel. And it was his YouTube channel where I first discovered him. He's got these great videos showcasing long river floats, all sorts of adventures all over the place. But in particular, he's doing river floats for whitetails. And it looks like he's just having an absolute blast along the way. He's seeing deer, fishing, having great camping, adventures too. So it just looks like a very well-rounded, fun experience. And he's bringing home meat as well. So it's a win-win, across the board, good stuff. So my hope today with my conversation with Kyle is to better understand, why adventure is important to him, how he's been adding that to his hunting experiences, and then specifically, the logistics of picking out a place to hunt, picking a river system that could be productive. What kind of boats work well for this? What kind of camping gear do you need? What kind of hunting gear do you need? How do you feed yourself out there? What kinds of techniques work best? Should you hunt while you're floating, or should you pull over and slip around and hunt on the ground? Should you bring sticks and stand? What's the right way to do this? Or at least what's the way that he's found to be successful? So that's our plan. We discuss high-level planning. We discuss in-the-weed tactics and some fun stuff along the way as well. So without further ado, I say we should get to my chat with Kyle. Here we go. All right, with me now on the line, I've got Kyle McClelland. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Mark, and welcome everybody who's tuning in.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here with me. And I gotta say, your approach to things, I guess, from what I can see with your YouTube channel and everything like that, has struck a chord with me, because it seems like what you value in a hunt and a wilderness experience is very much what I have sensed that I personally need more of right now. So we're kicking off this series here on this podcast, kind of exploring different ways to bring adventure back into our hunting lives, especially whitetail hunting. I think for a lot of whitetail hunters, the standard whitetail approach, and something that I have, fallen to a lot is you've got your farm and you try to find your big bucks, and you go and you sit these stands you've meticulously worked to make a great deer hunting spot, and that's kind of all you do. But you've got a very different approach a lot of the times, it seems like. And I got to ask, from the 30,000 foot overview perspective, why is adventure important to you? And how would you define adventure?
Well, I would say adventure is important to me because I love all aspects of the outdoors. And, going on river float hunts or camping, overnight backpacking trips like I've been doing. Yeah, it's such a great way to incorporate that, whether it's cooking, exploring, enjoying the scenery. You can, do some fishing if you'd like, do some hunting. There's so much that the outdoors in Michigan provides, and that's accessible to us. And we're very, very grateful and fortunate to have this. So yeah, the opportunities and the potential is endless. And that's what means the most to me, is the adventure and just enjoying the overall outdoor experience.
Yeah. So how did this start for you? Were your hunts and fishing trips and things like this from an early age? Or did you kind of build up to this point when you realized, hey, I want to have a broader experience, I want bigger, wilder experiences? Like, what was that evolution for you?
Yeah, so I've been in the outdoors my entire life. I grew up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and I lived up there until about the end of high school. And then I always had a dream to start a charter fishing business. So I moved down to the Lower Peninsula, Michigan, and that's where I started that. But now I'm in a place where, I've been creating content, and I haven't had a lot of time throughout my adult life to really hunt. And now that I'm in a place where I can devote more time to it, and I've slowed down on the charter fishing now, and I'm directing my focus more to creating content. I'm very grateful to be able to get back into the sport, and I've been learning a ton and just been able to go on some pretty awesome adventures the last couple of years. So
the best adventure of your life, what would that be? What would you, if you had to slap a label on the best or most memorable outdoor adventure, what did that look like?
Well, if I had to pick one, I'll pick one locally here. This past summer on Isle Royal, I went out to Isle Royal 2 different times this past summer. I spent my first trip, I was out solo for 7 days, and then I did another 12-day trip. And I have to say that was probably the most meaningful, well-rounded, positive outdoor experience that I've had. Probably my favorite, if I had to say, but it's so hard because I've been fortunate, been able to travel to a lot of places and see a lot of beautiful countries. So I would say that's probably my top one right now, though.
So what made it so great? You mentioned it was well-rounded. What does that mean in your view? And what makes? I understand Isle Royale is a dramatic, wild landscape, but But I ask this because I imagine there are people out there who maybe have not done these kinds of things, who are
Yeah.
trying to figure out, who maybe feel like that hole in them that they need to fill, and they feel like, man, something wild, some kind of adventure would do it. But how do I do that? And what's the kind of thing I'm looking for? And what does success look like with that kind of trip? So for you, with that Isle Royale trip, I'm curious, what that looked like for you. What made it a success? What made it so well-rounded and special?
So I'd probably have to say just the overall environment and culture out there. It's an environment like nowhere I've ever experienced because it's essentially going out there is essentially a filter, right? So to go out there, you have to be well organized, well planned. Everything has to be thought through, and you have to want to be there. Like it has to be in your heart. And if you go out there and it's not, then you're probably not going to have the best experience. But the people you meet out there is second to none. You don't have any cell phone service, so that's something to be said in this day and age as it is. So just being able to go out there, connect with nature, connect with other people on a genuine level where you don't have the noise of, politics or phone, social media, whatever it may be. You can just focus on just nature and just disconnect yourself. And the scenery is second to none. The fishing is beautiful. Obviously, you can't hunt out there, but I hunted myself. With a camera, you could hunt moose, wolves, and I did that. I backpacked into some places. I did some tracking with moose, and I was able to spend a night with a wolf pack one night. So I've had some amazing experiences out there, and like I said, the scenery is just second to none. And there are just so many different aspects of the outdoors that you can enjoy and experience out there, whether it's picking berries, hiking, canoeing, taking your own boat, your personal watercraft. If you want a hardcore fishing adventure, you can do that. If you want a well-rounded hiking, exploring adventure, you can do that as well. So the options are endless. And yeah, the community and the culture out there, everybody is just so friendly, willing to help you out. And it's a unique experience to be at one of those campsites out there because, there are designated campsites. And when you reach one of these places, there are multiple other people there usually. Sometimes it can be busy. Sometimes there's nobody there. But I've met some of the coolest people in my life there, and I've built some of the most meaningful relationships to me from my past trips out there this summer. So definitely looking forward to getting back out there and can't wait for future trips.
Yeah, it looks amazing. My dad has told me stories about his trip. He took one trip there when he was a young man, and he's wanted to get back ever since. And so that's on the bucket list that we need to get there someday together. And so yeah, I'm envious that you got to spend two lengthy, deep trips out there. It looks spectacular. On the whitetail side, though, what originally caught my eye with you is it seems like YouTube is feeding your videos all over the place right now. They're really giving you a good algorithm boost because it keeps on popping up on my feed. And so I noticed your whitetail hunts from a boat, floating down rivers, chasing deer that way. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I've always had the idea, and it's always something that you hear about, or I would hear about from folks who have been around a lot longer than me. It's just kind of one of those old tales, floating down the river for me in the UP anyways, hunting that way. And so to be able to do it the last couple of years it's been an awesome experience. And for me personally, like I said, I was a full-time charter fishing captain on the rivers here in Northwest Michigan. And it just kind of connected. Like I'd be out on the river on float boat trips in my drift boat every single day. And then I'd have a day off and I would see nice bucks here and there. So I just decided I'd try to do a float hunt and see what would happen, and it went well. It's gone well over the years. I've been learning a lot. I've been successful, and yeah, it's been an awesome experience.
So what's the appeal? Like why hunt deer with a boat floating down a river? What makes that so special?
For me, it's the adventure, and for me, I get a little stir crazy hunting out of a blind, to be honest. It's something I do enjoy and something I do, but it's nice to have that. It's nice to have a break and be able to mix it up. And you can hunt with another person. The river's beautiful. The scenery is always beautiful on the river. So you have that aspect. If you want to take a break and cook lunch, you can do that. You can talk, and at times you can talk and be social. And so I think that aspect for me is, yeah, just mostly the well-rounded adventure aspect is what means the most to me with float hunting.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've actually been thinking strongly about trying a trip like this myself. I've started kind of thinking about earlier this year, just kind of realizing that I need to switch up my whitetail program, and I've thought there's been kind of three different avenues I've thought the most about. One has been doing a float down a river. One has been doing like a boundary water style, going in on a lake with a canoe and portaging from place to place. And then one has been just doing like a backpacking whitetail hunt and finding somewhere you could backpack into and live off your back in that kind of way. But your videos have definitely been one of those things that's reminded me of the appeal of being on the river and being a big fly fisherman myself. The opportunity to possibly pair those two things together is awfully appealing. I can see that being a really nice way to spend a few days. So that said, selfishly, as I'm considering planning something like this, I've got a lot of logistic related questions for you. So one of the first things I've wondered about is just how much thought you've given to time of year for this kind of thing. Have you been pretty tight to a certain part of the year? Is there a certain part of the season that you think makes the most sense to do this kind of thing? Any considerations from a timing perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, obviously in Michigan, our rifle season is November 15th to the end of the month. And then we have muzzleload season after that. So I would definitely recommend going at one of those two in one of those two time frames. Obviously with the bow, the opportunities are just going to be greatly reduced. And float hunting is a difficult style of hunting. You have to be constantly focused. You always have to be focused. You always have to be ready, and you always have to be in high spirits as well. Because as soon as you get flustered, where something might not be going your way, or you have other people, or whatever conditions aren't working out, that's usually when the opportunity happens. So
Yeah.
you just have to be, and you constantly have to be aware. And it's just a test of your senses, really, because when you're floating downriver, and the best time to float hunt is after a snow, for sure. If you can hit it the day after a snow, that is the best time, because not only will it help you pick out the deer, but you can also see fresh tracks. And it just gives away a lot of their sign, that leads to them. So that's definitely the best time. If you can hit a float hunt right after a fresh snow. You can be successful at other times. Obviously, as you probably saw in my videos, it can be tough though. As I've experienced some tough hunting this past year with warmer temperatures, high pressured areas, and no snow. When the deer just really hunker down in the thick brush and you're just looking for a needle in a haystack as you float down. Like I said, if you have snow, they're easier to pick out. But if you don't, I mean, you know how they get, once they get pressured, a lot of times you'll float right by them 30, 40 yards and they won't even budge, or you'll just see a tip of their ear. Or it can be tricky. So
Yeah. So one of the things I've been curious about is the hunting pressure thing. Have you found on these river systems, is there, has there been other hunting pressure? Are there other people doing the same kind of thing as you? And then secondly, does the fishing pressure impact them? General recreational pressure? How have you seen this to be a thing that is getting you away from pressure, or are you dealing with a lot of it still?
both, both. So you can definitely have, secluded. I've had trips where I've gone out for several days, haven't saw a single person, but I've also had trips where I go out and I'll see multiple people in the same day. And just like with a lot of things in the outdoors, deer adapt and they catch on. So, once that little bit of pressure seems to happen in an area, it can definitely take an effect on the hunting. They seem to bump off the river a little bit. They're far more aware, and your odds of just catching one down feeding, or coming down and just hanging out with the doe by the river is just greatly reduced. So it's definitely tricky, but it is nice because you can, if you do have the adventurous aspect to things where you're not just specifically worried about harvesting a big buck, and you're more geared towards an adventure and trying somewhere new and pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, can really lead you to some fantastic places and experiences and just really surprise you. So I think that's what I've found my most successful trips, with duck hunting or whitetail have been, where I've just kind of, got on a map, found a section or river that I never tried before, and just like, hey, we're gonna go do this, and just go do it. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, but that's what makes it fun and entertaining, I guess. So
Yeah. So I don't want to know anything about specific locations.
yeah,
But I am curious about that process you just described, like looking at a map and finding somewhere new and
yep,
figuring out, hey, I'm gonna go do a trip there. Like, what are you looking for as far as, signs that yes, this could be a good spot for a float hunt? How do you pick a spot? What are you thinking about as far as logistics, as far as length, as far as, will this have deer, will it not have deer, or will this be a good adventure, will it not be a good adventure? There's got to be a lot that goes into making that decision.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely there is, and it just, so to start, I guess I break it down for how many days I have, and I've been able to kind of, just through fishing mostly, been able to judge how far I can drift a river in a day. So that way it kind of helps me a little bit. But at the same time, it can be tough. I always I would recommend giving yourself an extra day or two than you probably, expect, just because the unexpected typically tends to happen. But yeah, oops, I ran out of my
No, you're
train.
good. You're good. You were just explaining. You were explaining the way, like the ways you're picking a specific river or a section of
Yeah.
river to float. And just,
Yes.
my question was around, how do you determine what's a good stretch or what's a good area? Because there has to be, at least when I would think about it, I would be maybe over analyzing 1,000 different things, trying to figure out, is this a good spot to
Yeah.
hunt? Is this a good spot to float? Is there going to be camping there? Is there going to be enough public land? Where will I camp?
Yeah.
Is there good fishing? How do I get in? Where am I going to get out? Like, it just seems to be so many criteria to weigh.
Yeah, and obviously number one is finding a section or river with plenty of public property. For me personally, I just use Onyx. That's all I use, and it seems to work fine, as far as finding public land. And then you can start getting into the details of different terrain types, the time of year you're hunting. Maybe if you're hunting with some more snow on the ground, you want maybe a more dense cedar swamp kind of area, or it's nice to mix in some high oak ridges with a good food source. So yeah, you can really, I mean, as you know, with hunting, you can break things down into any level you want. So I find myself just staring at Onyx and for endless hours a lot of times before I head
Mm-hmm.
out. But yeah, but until you get out there and put boots on the ground, that's when you really, for me anyways, really learn the terrain that you're hunting, and you really find a lot of those little, hidden kept secrets that you can put in your memory bank of, just because a lot of times from what I found is you'll float a long section of river, but it'll be that same little section for whatever reason that's kind of holding the deer. And then you can, for future trips, go back and kind of plan on that spot as being productive, or, where to be aware and where not to be aware. But yeah, and I guess that's what I look at is one, state land, where the most public land is. Then two, look at different terrain features. I like a lot of areas, especially after a snow down by the river with heavy cedars. Usually in that type of forest after a snow, you can pick them out pretty good when they're bedded up under the trees. Or if you float through a section with some nice big oak ridges, you can glass as you float down and you can catch them up feeding a lot of times. Or you get by some of that thick bedding area as well, and you can catch a buck with a doe down by the river too. So
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, that's what I look for personally, I guess.
All right. So, how about your method of going down the river? I've seen you using just a standard drift boat. I think I've seen you in a jet boat. I've seen you do some trips with a canoe. What's your take on what the best rig is for a whitetail float hunt,
Well,
or pros and cons of the various options?
probably my favorite for a whitetail hunt, my favorite is my Stealthcraft drift boat. I have a 15-foot skiff drift boat. It's a Stealthcraft,
Those
and
are
that
nice.
boat is really nice. You can portage it. I have an ATV winch on the front, so I can portage it if I need. It's stable, super stable, easy to row. So you always have a nice stable shooting platform, which is huge because, like I said, you have to be constantly aware, constantly ready. So sometimes the opportunity doesn't present in the most ideal place. So that's huge. That's really nice. The boat travels well. I can load it down. I can load my gear up in it, take an excessive amount of gear if I plan to be out there for a longer time. And yeah, that is my preferred system of travel, I suppose, and
Okay.
method. But with whatever, you can use whatever you have, as I've shown as well. You can use a canoe if that's all you have, or you can use a jet boat, you could use a rowboat, you could use whatever you want, really. So it's just making it work, I guess.
Yeah. So, okay. Other important gear. You're going out there, I know, for usually, not always, but usually multiple days at a time, camping out there. Um, you've got your standard deer hunting stuff. We'll just assume like that's a given. You're going to have your rifle, your basic necessities from a hunting perspective. Can you walk me through some of the things as far as gear that are unique to this kind of hunt?
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing is preparation and just having two of the essentials.
Hmm.
And it depends. I guess it gets down to if you're going to go out for just a single day or if you're going to go out for multiple days. I always like to have two of the essentials. I spend an excessive amount of time. Oops. I spend an excessive amount of time preparing, planning, and organizing. If you're not well organized and well planned and everything's thought through, then it's going to lead to a challenge, more of a challenging experience, and you're going to face difficulties. So that is definitely something to prioritize is organization and planning. So with that being said, I like to confine things. If I'm going out for a trip, I like to confine things in a few different dry bags. I'll maybe say I'll have two or three different dry bags. I'll have one dry bag with, say my hunting essentials, first aid kit, that sort of thing. Another bag with clothing, another bag with, food, a food bag filled up. So yeah, just having I guess you might have to edit that one out.
No, you're good. Give me the
Get rambling.
camping gear program. It
Yeah.
seems like from what I've seen, I feel like I've seen you using kind of like a wall tent style with a stove in there sometimes. But can you walk me through what you like to use and why you like to do it that
Yeah.
way?
Yep. So if I have the room and the space and I plan to be out for an extended amount of time, having the wall tent is very nice because at the end of the day, you can have a hot fire, warm up, dry your clothes out if you get wet. But a lot of times I don't have that luxury, especially if I'm floating in a canoe. So I'll bring, a two-person, just a backpacking tent. And, that works well too. So especially if you're floating through an area where it's not as easy to set up a camp and you're in a tight spot, I can throw that backpacking tent up pretty much anywhere and call home for the night. So
Okay.
just having those options, I guess, and using whatever your circumstance and your situation is best, what's best for your circumstance and your situation.
So everyone who camps a lot, especially like backpackers or doing float trips, anything like this, I feel like we've all got a little camping hack or two, or a little idiosyncrasy, some little thing that we do that just makes life a little nicer or a little easier out there in the field. Is there any little thing you do that makes your camp just a little bit nicer or a little more convenient, or something you've picked up over the years that's a little bit unique to you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, pretty. I'd say a lot of the things I do are probably unique and not off the book. I just, go with the flow and have came up with my own systems. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint a specific one, not being out there right now. But yeah, gosh,
Well, what about, here's another thing. If while you're thinking about that, is there any weird piece of gear that you bring? Has there been like an item that you've learned over the years is really nice to have that most people wouldn't think about when planning this kind of trip? Is there something that over the years you've just realized like, oh man, that ends up coming clutch?
yeah. I mean, there are definitely little things that are escaping my memory right now. But I think one of the most important things is just having dry bags and making sure you can keep all your gear dry, especially the essentials, your sleeping bag,
Yeah.
your clothes. That obviously that's just something to really prioritize and make important, especially if you're going out for overnight canoeing trips and into the backcountry. So, yeah, I guess I'd have to think about that. I have little things, but Yeah. So
You being on the river, like you said, there's a high potential for getting wet.
yes.
Do you have any hack for getting stuff dry other than just having that wall tent with the stove in there? Do you have any elaborate clothesline systems or anything you figured out to get stuff dry fast if you fall in or get a wet boot or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely bring clotheslines, if I have to dry things out over a fire or if I have to dry things out in the wind and pull off on a nice sunny windy day. Um, that's very important because if you find yourself in a wet, uncomfortable situation on day two of a 4-day float, it's gonna make for a miserable trip. So you have to be prepared and yeah, just expect the unexpected and just be ready for problems and obstacles because you're going to face them at some point. So
Yeah.
just going into it with the right mindset and just embracing that, I guess, is important in my eyes.
On a lot of like backpacking hunts I've done in the past, and just not even just hunts, but just backpacking trips in general, I'm generally a minimalist when it comes to clothing. I'll usually just have like one outfit, what I'm wearing hiking in there,
Yeah.
and then I'm wearing that the whole time, and then maybe like an extra like puffy jacket or whatever it is like that. But with a hunt like this, where there's that risk of getting wet, do you bring extra sets of clothes because of that? Do you do anything on that to account for that?
Absolutely. I always, like I said, I try to have two of everything. So I'll always have a secure set of clothes in a dry bag that I just don't touch. I stash it in the boat. Just doesn't get touched. It's just kind of for an emergency. Same with a blanket or a sleeping bag. Yes, that's very important. It's very important, especially when you're floating during the cold months and you're dealing with snow or sleet, heavy rains, because yeah, you can find yourself in a dangerous situation if you're not well prepared, for sure.
Yeah. As far as heat, you mentioned a stove. Do you bring a buddy heater or any other things to help with heat on one of those cold weather hunts?
Yeah, sure. If I'm able to, and it just depends on the hunt I'm going on, I guess. At times I do, at times I don't. Sometimes I just rough it. And if I have my sleeping bag and can warm up a warm bottle of water at night, that's all I need. But at other times it is, if I have the luxury and the option to bring a buddy heater, it's really nice to have one, especially if you get a chill during the day as you're floating downstream, you can turn it on and warm up your hands or warm up your feet. It's nice to put in your tent as well. In my small backpacking tent, it's not practical because the tent's so small. So it's not practical in that sense. So but yeah, if I'm bringing the wall tent and if I have my drift boat, if I have the luxury and the space to bring a buddy heater, absolutely. Same with the wood stove. If I can bring that, it's always nice to have a fire at night. But sometimes the adventure that you plan just doesn't, you don't have that option. So just kind of go with the flow of
Yeah.
wherever we're hunting. So
All right. Food. What's the food program for most of these hunts? Do you have a system that you like to stick to? Does it get changed up based on the length of time and where you're at? What's your recommendation on that front?
yeah, food. So if you've watched my videos, I usually like to pack quite a bit of food, and I like to bring fresh food as well. So for me personally, I like to bring a cooler if I'm able to, and load it down with some food. I'll bring some backstrap or bring a steak or some potatoes and eggs and bacon. Throw down on some breakfast and food at times because I think that's important. Especially if you're on long trips, is just taking the time to just stop sometimes because I find myself always getting so involved and caught up into just the pursuit of a fish or a deer or whatever I'm hunting at the time. So it's nice to just slow down and have a nice meal on the river sometimes. And that is important in my eyes for what I've been doing anyway. So yeah, I'll bring some of that, but also if I'm not able to, where it's getting warm during the day and I'm on an extended trip where I'm not able to keep food cold, I'll always bring, Mountain House meals or corned beef hash, spam, just some backups, just in case I was able to find myself out there for longer than I anticipated. Or sometimes that's all you can bring if I go on long trips. So yeah, if I'm able to, I'll bring fresh produce, bring some fresh meat. But like I said, it just comes down to the trip you're going on as well, and not every trip you're able to do that. So
You mentioned liking to throw down for a good breakfast sometimes. So I've seen a few
oh yeah,
where you'll have a good breakfast and get a late start to the hunt, and that kind of brings me to the hunting side of all this. I'm curious what the typical hunt day looks like for one of these river floats because I could see I can see a lot of ways of going about this and a lot of reasons to go different ways. I think I've seen some videos where you're up and at it early and it's dark and you're getting to a spot and want to get anchored in the dark and then head out to hunt on the land. I've seen other times where you've said, well, I wanted to wait till it was light enough that I could see while I float along looking for deer. So what's your typical day, and why might you choose, an early start versus a late start or anything like that?
Yeah. So if I'm going into a section of woods that I know, I'll get out early. And then I'll put myself in those places where I'm anticipating seeing deer first thing in the morning, whether that be a food source or, an active scrape line, something like that. I'll put myself in one of those situations first thing. But if I'm floating in an area that I've never hunted before, never been in, which honestly, if you've watched my videos, that's usually what I like to do, is just take on the adventure and float and explore new areas I've never been. So if I'm in that situation, then I like to let a little bit of light come through where I can just analyze the forest. I'm not skipping over things. I can analyze the forest, I can slow down, and I can just take my time. And I think that's really important, because if you get in a rush, especially if you're in areas, or I find myself doing this, I can preach it all I want, but I find myself doing this more times than you'd think. It's just biting off a hunk too big, where you get yourself too caught up in a too big of a world where you don't know where to slow down and what to pay attention to and what to focus on. So yeah, it just depends where I'm hunting, I suppose. If I'm in an area, like I said, that I'm familiar with and I know where I want to be, I'll get out there first thing in the morning. But if I'm not, I'll let, just half hour of daylight come in where I can start to scan the forest. And being a content creator and filming these adventure videos, sometimes I get to do what I love, but sometimes you do have to prioritize the filming a little bit. And sometimes that takes up a lot of time. So it can be tough to get out there first thing,
Trust me, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
What about, making the decision on whether to float and hunt versus park and walk around, or hunt somewhere planted on the ground? I've seen you do both on that front. How do you go about deciding which of those you're going to do?
So yeah, I pretty much just go with the flow for the day. When I start off for the day, so say if I'm starting off on a float, I start floating down. I'm the first person down the river. I'm seeing deer, seeing activity. Then I'm going to keep rolling it. If things are going good, I'm going to keep it going. But if I get out, say I'm out floating for a couple hours, I pull off for a few minutes, I get passed by another boat, somebody else is floating down, or I'm seeing a lot of traffic on the river, then I'm going to and I'm not, not being successful, then I'm going to start scheming up some other ideas here where, say I float down, see some nice deer signs, see some rubs, a nice ridge, a good food source. Maybe I'm going to go sit on a ridge for the afternoon, mix it up a little bit. Or if you have snow on the ground and I see a fresh set of tracks that I know that was just made, you could track the deer, or you have options, and one thing I've been starting to do as well, and one thing I've really learned is with this style of hunting, is being patient as well. Like it's hard, because when you're floating downriver, usually opportunities are coming at a snap of a finger. You have a split second to see the deer. A lot of times it's a running shot or picking out an ethical shot, and just making sure that you take a clean shot. It can be tough. So what I've learned is, a lot of times if you're floating down, you see a deer that you'd like to harvest or like to have a chance at, or if you see an area, see an opportunity, just keep floating. And I keep my anchor where it's quiet to let down. I'll pay attention to the wind direction. I like to get the wind in my face. So if I see a deer bedded up, I'll keep floating down. I'll float around. Usually the river makes big bends, so I'll keep floating around the big bend. I'll get on the far side, maybe a half mile down. I'll slip out the anchor. I'll have the anchor where I can just slip it out. Then I can get up on a little ridge and start still hunting my way that way, and just taking my time. You get the wind in your face and you go really slow. And usually you'd be surprised. You do it right, you can have an opportunity. And it's not an easy style, and you're going to have a lot of learning experiences along the way, but it's like that with anything though. So it's exhilarating, to say the least.
Yeah. Okay. So that was one of the things I was curious about, was going to be, is the best way to go past them, which kind of would be the assumption, because I would assume if you try to anchor right away, they'd be like on it and running out of there. Yeah. But it seems like sometimes you have had opportunities where, like, the deer is there in front of you and you're able to actually get a shot while you're kind of floating by, or close to that kind of situation. Does that occasionally happen?
Yeah, that's what you hope for. In the perfect world, you're going to come around the corner and there's going to be a nice buck standing with the doe right there in the brush, and
Uh-huh.
All is good, but usually it doesn't work that way. But you do have your opportunities. So that's just, it comes down to one of those things, like I said earlier, just always being ready, always being aware, and just always being ready for that opportunity, because you never know when it's going to present, and being able to make it happen too, or putting yourself in the position to make it happen when things aren't in your favor per se as well. So yeah, in a perfect world, every shot would be like that, but sometimes you just got to try different things and push yourself outside of your comfort zone. And that's really what I experienced this year is on my float hunt. I set off a few days after rifle season, which isn't ideal because at that point the deer are pressured. But this year it was warm for us as well. So my first few days, I wasn't successful. I didn't see many deer. I saw a couple small bucks, but not a lot. Not what I was really hoping for. So then I just started trying some different things. I started still hunting. I started, looking for food source and getting up on ridges and, and if you just keep throwing stuff at the wall, sooner or later something's going to stick, so that's kind of where I came from with that, and it's been beneficial, and I've really learned a lot this year. So
how you talked about the necessity of just being ready,
yeah,
when it happens. What do you do to make sure that you are as ready as possible? Because I imagine there's a lot to handle in those moments, because you are trying to navigate down a river. And I know a lot of these rivers, there's lots of winds and bends, and there's, trees hanging out in them, and there's all sorts of stuff. So you have to navigate the river while also trying to be watching for deer. And then if a deer does happen to show up, then you are, I'm sure, trying to figure out, where's my gun? How do I get a shot? Or how do I see the deer? Or how do I make sure I have time to do this before I have to navigate the boat around this obstacle or whatever? You must have some kind of system of where you put things, or how you do things, or how you have it set up so that you can handle that moment as best as possible. What do you recommend on that front?
Yeah, there's a lot going on out there. Yes, and you have to be ready, and you have to make sure that, I think the most important thing is being well organized, having the boat well organized, and just being aware and having a good space where you can operate in case you have to shuffle a little bit to make a shot. You have to roll, pull back, get on the oars quick. Just having everything ready and prepared and thought through, I think, is the most important thing. And it's safety too. I don't know if I've touched on this yet, but yeah, safety as well. And that's being organized and prepared. That's really feeds into the safety aspect too, because when you're on these floats, often, like you said, you have a lot of fast corners, you have a lot of little riffly areas, little rapids, and if you're not constantly on your game and constantly prioritizing safety, there's a lot that can go wrong. So just, that's very important. So
Have you had anything go sideways yet?
Anything go sideways? Yeah.
Not literally sideways, but I mean, like, have you had anything go wrong on one of these trips where something got away from you, or you were looking at a deer and you hit a snag, or anything like that?
Yeah, nothing crazy, nothing dangerous, nothing. But I've been through a lot. I could, for the people who fish with me and know, yeah, I found myself in some interesting situations over the years, and I've learned a lot from them. So, it's just, always being prepared and always being ready and prioritizing safety, I guess.
All right, so back to a hunt scenario. You're floating down the river. You mentioned scenario number one, which is you're floating down the river and there's a nice buck right in the edge with a doe, and he's standing there like an idiot, and you have time to grab your gun and get a shot. That's beautiful. Sounds pretty rare, but if it happens, awesome. There's scenario number two, which is you're floating down the river and you see a deer, and you just keep on floating right past it since there's not a good easy shot opportunity, and you get hidden somewhere, you anchor, you slip up, still hunt, get a shot. How about scenario number three, which is you're floating down the river, you see a deer, and before you can do anything, that deer boogers out of there. You see it run away. What do you do in that scenario?
That's tough too. That's a tough scenario, especially when you're hunting in a lot of the areas I am, where it's just big woods. And a lot of times those deer catch on to you and they're just gone. You can always try. A lot of times, if I do see that, I'll go downstream, maybe float downstream a half mile, anchor up, take my time, just take my time, let the forest settle down, and then maybe I'll try to still hunt back through there. But it just depends on the deer, I guess. If I float by the deer and I catch them bedded up and, I don't have a shot, but I don't spook them, then, I'll get right on him. But if he happens to spook out of that general area, then maybe I'll give it some time and go back in. But that's a really tough scenario, though, especially where, I typically find myself hunting in really big woods. So a lot of times those deer get spooked and they're gone. They're
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah. What does I guess I asked this earlier when it comes to the mornings, but throughout the rest of the day, I mean, are you hunting pretty well in the morning and the evenings, and then the middle of the day, giving yourself some time to relax? I could see myself being tempted to want to fish through the middle of the day. How do you balance that out? Do you do one or the other, or are you constantly hunting the whole time and just occasionally? Like, I remember seeing one video where you were passing through private land, and so you took time to fish while you were passing through private land. But is that, what does it look like if you've just got public everywhere and you could hunt all day and you could have your gun at the ready all day, but at the same time you've got steelhead or brown trout or whatever around you, or maybe you're doing this down south and you've got bass you could be fishing too. How do you approach balancing all that and what your day looks like?
Yeah, I guess it just, like I said, it just kind of, I just go with the flow. If I typically always try to make time for a lunch or for some sort of a break middle of the day. But a lot of times, especially where I'm at, northern Michigan, if you have a big snowstorm coming through, or you have the right weather, you can have deer moving all day long, or you can catch a buck chasing a doe. You never know what time of day. So it just depends. It just really depends, and there are so many other options and possibilities you can do in the outdoors. So it is nice, if you wanted to take a cast and do some fishing for a little bit and kind of reset yourself. So you have that option. But yeah, I just go with the flow, honestly, Mark. If I'm going out in the morning, if I know where I'm at, I know the terrain, I know where some good food sources are, where I kind of predict to see deer, I'll get out there early. If I'm floating throughout the day, not much is going on at this point, mid-morning, haven't saw anything in quite some time. I'll take a break, take a break for a couple hours, but then sometimes you catch yourself on I've caught myself on these long trips where I have to keep pushing throughout the day too to meet my goal. So just, I always find myself planning and thinking through these adventures to a T what I think, but until you put yourself out there in the elements, it's really hard to know what to expect on that trip.
Yeah. Yeah, I love you keep saying to just go with the flow. And that is to any longtime listeners listening, they know that is something that I struggle to do because I am like the planner to a T of everything. So what you're telling me is something that I know I should do more of. And so maybe I just need to hang out with you more often and learn to absorb your go with the flow vibes so I can pick that up and put that into practice. Because yes, I imagine that's a pretty good way to go about things. And maybe what makes an adventure what it is to some degree is the fact that it doesn't have to be pre-planned to the minute, that you sometimes take what the adventure gives you. And that's sometimes the most beautiful thing of it all, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody's different, but yeah, for me, that works for me. So
Yeah. You alluded earlier to a couple different features or things that you'll look for. And I just wanted to circle back to that to make sure we covered off on that. When you're floating a river or when you're looking at the maps ahead of time and you're trying to plan your day, are there any other specific, habitat features or some kind of topography that you've learned attracts deer or funnels deer in a certain way that you kind of circle on the map or key in on your mind or throw a pin on Onyx is like, hey, I got to make sure to check this out. Hey, I got to slow down here. Hey, maybe this is a spot I should get out of the boat and sit for a couple hours. Are there any of those key things that folks should be looking for?
yeah, absolutely. If you're floating and, if you can pick out a nice section where, or not just even floating, but in general, I guess, if you can pick out a nice ridge with some oaks, if you get some nice white oaks, for me, that's what I personally find most of the success around in the woods that I hunt. If you can find that with some thick bedding area nearby, and then if you can find some nice benches or saddles on that ridge, that's a great spot, especially for bucks to be traveling and trying to pick up a hot doe. So, Yeah, and a bench is pretty much, just where a ridge kind of comes down, flattens out, and comes back down. And I've been learning a ton these last couple years. Like I said, I haven't had a lot of time to hunt throughout my adult life until these last couple years. So these are all things, and that's kind of what I portray in my videos to my viewers as well. Is you're coming along with me for my learning experiences and for the whole experience. It's you know we're gonna learn and we're gonna do this together. So I think people connect with that. So yeah, just I got off on a tangent again.
No, you're fine. I think that's the great thing about an adventure, is that so much of it is unknown. And I think that's why this whole idea of trying new things, going new places, widening the aperture of what a whitetail hunt can be is so appealing, because so much of the typical whitetail hunting culture these days is everything. I've got places I hunt where I know for years and years and years exactly where the deer come from. And there's some spots where I have, changed the habitat in such a way to even further influence deer do exactly what I think they should do, or when they do something when I want them, or how they want them to do. So what you're describing is the complete opposite of that, which is, I think, very refreshing. And I can see the appeal to it. Now, let's say that you've done this. You have floated down the river. You have gone hard on big breakfasts. You have dabbled with some fishing throughout. You have avoided getting too wet. And if you did get wet, you had a good dryer set up so you could stay warm and be comfortable. All of this happens. You go with the flow and you shoot a deer. You successfully put a tag on a deer on the river. How have you found works best to get that deer out of there? Are you typically gutting it and putting the whole thing in the boat and floating it out? Have you ever tried quartering it? Anything like that? What's your best practice there?
Yeah. So for me personally, I haven't. I guess it depends on the situation. I shot one this year where it fell off the top of a ridge and went in the river. So I just kind of tied her up and got her in the boat the best that I can. Then I took her out, gutted her, after I was done hunting that evening. But typically if I have the time and then, things are looking, going in a good direction, I like to take my time and gut the deer right then and there, get it taken care of. And then, yeah, if you can hang her up at night, that's the best thing to do. And, maybe in some scenarios, quartering the deer out would be the best thing to do. But typically I don't know. I'll just maybe hang them up at night, or I'll just put them in the front of the boat until I get done with my trip. So that seems to work well.
Have you gotten any crazy looks from other folks on the river while floating down with a dead deer in your boat?
Oh yeah, for sure. especially in areas, where there's other outdoor recreation besides just hunting, So it can be funny sometimes, for sure.
Yeah, I bet. All right. Final kind of topic here. Just being someone who values adventure in the way that you do, chasing adventure. I guess it's adventure chasing would be the title of the YouTube channel. But what things have you found to be important when it comes to bringing adventure to your life? If someone's listening and they just want to they want to have a more adventurous life, or they want some other suggestions of ways to do this, do you have anything else to add?
Don't be afraid to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. Always try to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. I think that's been one of the biggest things for me, because you never know how things are going to turn out. You never know who you're going to meet. You never know what door is going to open. So just being open-minded, for one, being apt to try new things, try different tactics, try new experiences, and just, pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, I think, been the biggest thing for me, and not being afraid to try new things, and go places where you might not typically see yourself. And that's led to some of my most meaningful and enjoyable experiences. Absolutely. And what's been kind of nice, what I've kind of learned myself through creating content, just how it's worked out, is it's kind of slowed me down a little bit when I go out on these adventures and I have to just prioritize filming and little things. Cause I did this stuff long before I did YouTube too, and these kind of adventures. And I'd always find myself in always such a rush or not taking the time to just take a deep breath and appreciate and enjoy the scenery and more that the outdoors has to offer than just the big buck or the big fish so I think that's really what has meant a lot to me too, is just making sure you prioritize some time on these trips to just slow down and just, enjoy the trip for what it is, because you can't always go into these adventures. You can't go in with expectations like, oh, I'm going to shoot a big buck or I'm going to catch this big fish. You can't, because it's not realistic. And if you set your expectations that high, then you're going to, be disappointed. But if you don't, and you just go in with it with an open mind, and I'm going to do this, and my goal for this is just to complete the adventure, and who knows what can happen. And then you just are surprised, and just things happen and just things work out. They seem to work out. So
yeah, I think that's a great philosophy. What's the next way that you plan to push yourself outside of the comfort zone? What's the dream trip or the next big adventure where you are going to try to spread your wings and fly into a new place?
So I'm going to get into some, I'm just going to get into more. I'm going to keep getting into more remote backpacking, camping, big adventures. Like I started doing this last year, like the Isle Royale and that sort of thing, going to remote places, maybe doing some fly-ins, getting dropped off and maybe doing some whitewater rivers. And I want to get a pack raft and do a lot of portaging through real remote places. So just keep moving, and I'm just planning to keep moving in that direction and just keep, building my skills and just learning more and more. And that's what I always preach in my videos that I post, is like, I try to anyways, like most of the time I'm not going down areas where I've fished or I've been. Like I try to show adapting, overcoming, figuring things out, the challenges. And I can, so I think that's a big part of the adventure is, just being open-minded and ready for whatever can happen. So,
yeah, I like it. All right. So if folks want to check out your videos or anything else, where can folks go to connect with you or to watch your content or to, if there's anything else you want to plug, let us know.
Yeah. Adventure Chasing on YouTube. You can look it up, just Adventure Chasing, simple name. And you'll see my content. It's fishing, hunting, camping, and exploring the outdoors. I've done mostly Michigan content, started to do Alaska, did a few videos in Alaska this past year. I've done some other videos from other places, but as my channel, I've been building my channel. I've been trying to focus on, Michigan content, and that's where my audience is primarily based. So, but as I keep growing, I'll keep expanding. So
very cool. Awesome, Kyle. Well, I've been enjoying it. Keep up the good work, and thanks so much for sharing this with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, and that's gonna do it. Our first episode in our Whitetail Adventure series. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Appreciate you tuning in. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.